Hey, what's up everybody? Chris here, and today I'm starting what's really kind of a new series for the channel, which is revisiting classic movies or visiting classic movies for the first time in a lot of these cases, and trying to figure out, what is it about these that has caused them to stand the test of time. And as someone who has not seen a lot of these movies that I'm going to be discussing, or it's been a really long time since I have seen them, do they warrant the praise that they've often garnered throughout the years, throughout the decades, depending on when they were released. So I'm hoping to have many of these different types of videos, because even though I'm a film lover, I love cinema, I love movies, there are a lot of classic movies. And when I say classic, I'm referring to things oftentimes that are let's say 2000, but have garnered a lot of praise. A lot of classic movies that I just have not seen, and so I'm trying to work through that backlog of movies that I know I really should have seen, and shame on me for having not seen them up until this point. So I kicked that off last night, working through that catalog with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And actually, I should say, leading up to that, I did watch the entire Man with No Name trilogy. So A Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I'm going to focus really on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly primarily because I think that's the one most people are familiar with or have heard of from that set of movies. I do think of the three movies, it is the best of that lot. It is the most well-developed movie, with a few caveats. So, if you were to go to some place like IMDb and look at their top 250 list, which is a fan-curated, list of the best movies ever made, and if you look at the number one movie as something like Shawshank Redemption, then you get into The Godfather. I believe The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is ranked at number 8 or 9 on that list, somewhere around there. So, of all the movies ever released on Earth, a lot of people will rank this as in the top 10 movies of all time. And the question is that accurate? So again, I just watched it for the first time. It was released in 1966, I think, so it's an older movie. Stars Clint Eastwood, if you're not familiar with that, in one of his earlier roles, but he had been, of course, playing a similar character in the previous two movies, but not the same character. And at first I was a little bit confused about whether or not this series is trying to imply that this is sort of one continuous story, or if there are time jumps. But it is, separate, I think, encapsulated, contained stories. And so the question again is it, truly a top 10 movie? So the runtime for the movie, or the version that I saw anyway, and I watched it on Stars with the Stars app, was close to 3 hours. So it's a long movie. And I don't really have an issue with long movies in general. I will say, though, that I think that the movie really could have done with a little bit of editing. Where specifically certain things could have been trimmed down to make it just a little bit more digestible, I'm not exactly certain, just right off having finished watching it. But I do think that at times it felt a little bit too grandiose for its own good. And so if you're not familiar with the plot, there are three sort of central characters: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in a very pre-Tarantino-esque way. And you can see very clearly how a movie like this inspired directors like Tarantino, from the way things are framed, from the music, from the presentation in general. You get that sense right from the start. And I think for no other reason we should respect the movie because of that. But the three main entities are the good, which is Clint Eastwood; the bad, which is Angel Eyes, an assassin, a hitman who sort of makes his way around the West, trying to collect money from various parties through shakedowns and murders and various other dark deeds; and the ugly, Tuco, so a character who's kind of comic, kind of darkly comic, someone that you don't really become a fan of necessarily. But you also, I wouldn't say necessarily want to see anything truly bad happen to. Maybe early on in the movie, that's not necessarily true, because he does some things with Clint Eastwood's character, Blondie, that are really rough. And I will say, for the time that this is released, it's actually a pretty dark movie. There are some crazy things that happen in this, such as beatings, torture. You see gunshots happening pretty clearly in some instances in the movie. Hangings. I mean, there are a number of different things that happen in the movie that I think were a little bit more jarring than I expected. But this whole movie is focused on these three individuals trying to make it to a burial plot where $200 or $200,000, $200,000 in Confederate gold, I believe it is buried with a corpse. And so, it's sort of this meandering, I don't want to say Forrest Gumpish presentation or Forrest Gumpish story, but kind of the story that causes these characters to sort of wind in and out of the events of the Civil War. So there's sort of this dichotomy in the movie that I think works, but at times it made me kind of question what the movie was really aiming for, because at points it works really well as a drama. There are some pretty poignant moments with battles during the Civil War where Clint Eastwood's character Blondie may give someone, a few puffs of his cigar and give him a blanket and that kind of stuff. But then you've got some really kind of lighthearted, comic, borderline cheesy moments that happen in the movie too. So I think the dichotomy gives it a sense of scale that's really respectable, but at the same time, I kind of felt like there was sort of this push and pull that didn't always fully work with it for some reason. And I don't know if it was the length or whatever, but it just felt a little bit kind of whiplash-inducing from time to time. But overall, the characters are great, the acting is great, the presentation is great, despite, the fact that you can see in some instances, at least in the version that I saw, the restoration of the film isn't great. You can tell it's deteriorated in the version that I was sort of working through. But, if I had to score the movie as a whole and sort of, try to quantify what I think about it, I would give it a 9 out of 10, I think. I think the story works really well. I think it's humorous. I think it does develop a lot of tension really well, especially when you get into the final act. Again, there are some moments where for me it dragged a little bit, but I can certainly understand why people see it as sort of a seminal Western, right? And really, in a lot of ways, maybe, I don't know if people will agree with this, but maybe the pinnacle of Sergio Leone's career as a filmmaker. And I need to go back and rewatch Once Upon a Time in America, because I have seen that, but that's been a long time. And if I remember, that movie is something like 4 hours. So that's another one that's ranked very highly, but it's been a while since I've seen it. So The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I think, is essential viewing if you like Westerns, and if you want to see sort of the history of that and maybe what inspires filmmakers like Tarantino, is definitely worth your time, I would say, though it can drag a little bit. So if you've seen the movie, let me know what you think about it. Do you think it's worth investing 3 hours into? Do you disagree with my assessment of it? Do you think it's a 10 out of 10? Or for some reason, do you think it's just an awful movie and deserves a 1 or even a 0 if you sort of view it that way? So let me know what you think. If you like the content, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel, be sure to subscribe. And I'll be back soon with more content. Thanks for watching.